Progressive Era. Hope you guys all have at least some sense of that. They get to the year 1900, they do this kind of special look at themselves, of course, because it was the turn of a century. And when they looked at America, when people looked at America, of course, in many ways extremely impressive. The greatest economy in the world, incredible corporations, of course, a magnet to the world, burgeoning, booming cities. Regardless of all of that, they didn't feel good about it, because there's a lot of problems. It's all that crap kind of built up from the Gilded Age period. They were concerned with the concentration of business power, horizontal integration, trusts, and monopolies. They were concerned, of course, with the potential abuse of consumers and competition. They were concerned with the well-being of the workers. Workers were really unhappy in the Gilded Age, and they're striking all over the place. They were concerned that there were too many immigrants in America. It was creating confusion of culture, a babel of tongues. They were concerned, of course, with cities that seemed congested, criminal-ridden, crime-ridden, problematic. They were concerned with the political corruption that was just rampant in the Gilded Age. All of this led the Americans of that moment, the middle class primarily, to feel that America was in a situation of crisis. When you guys get the study sheet on Thursday, you will see something like, how did the middle class reformers respond to the sense of crisis in 1900? That becomes the whole issue. So the middle class who really feel America really felt badly in 1900, and they sought to do something about it. They didn't run and hide. They tried to respond to it in a powerful kind of way. And what they would do is create one of the most important and powerful reform movements in American history. There's going to be a lot of stuff that they're going to do. You're going to have to hear it kind of coming down at you really quickly now. But you will begin this era that we call the Progressive Era. The middle class, of course, were motivated in their activities by their faith in progress. They believed that progress was the way of the world. By their faith in science, that science was the method they could use to ensure progress. They also were pushed by their desire to do good for America, but with a powerful sense of self-interest, of wanting to recreate America in the middle class image, to make it nice, neat, and orderly. That was the essential quest here, to bring order from the chaos of the Gilded Age, to make this now a nicer, neater, more orderly world if they possibly could. So all these things are kind of this powerful motivating factor that will push them ultimately to all kinds of interesting actions that I'll tell you about in a second, all right? But before I do so, I need to let you know that there was one other powerful source of the reform impulse, and that actually is a significance right there for you, okay? The source of the reform impulse was this thing that began to develop in the Gilded Age period, which became very important, that we call the new universities. And I told you this will be our first potential identification for the progressive new universities. Now, as I think I already told you guys before, I can tell you what's new, I have to tell you what's old, so I wanted to give you a sense of what was before in higher education. This is a revolution in higher education. That's the critical or ultimate thing you need to be aware of, right? Before the Civil War, what we had in America were denominational colleges serving a very small portion of the population. We're looking at about 2%, and I think I did this for you before, right, that these were the rich white men who got to go to school. And the only alternative to that were the couple colleges for women who served rich white women. Now, they went to these colleges, which were overwhelmingly denominational, of course. That meant that they were church affiliated, and they went there for the purposes pretty much of just enhancing their abilities as gentlemen. So we call it a classical education. That means you're going to learn Latin and Greek, literature and history, and things that are pretty much worthless like that. Okay, just things that that would allow you to be conversant and effective in terms of your courting practices and your interaction with other members of the elite. Now, it's kind of I'm going a little too far there, that there were some who were poor people who do get to the colleges, who do advance themselves professionally. I think like Eli Whitney would be at least something of an example of someone like that. Okay, so that's happening at times. But most of the people who are going there are rich white men who are simply enhancing their skills as gentlemen, all right? So you had the classical education component, and then you had the moral edification, that you were going there to become a better person. These are our denominational colleges. You would have to go to church. There would be a Christian component to the curriculum, which is absolutely legitimate. You go to that kind of church, that kind of college, that's what's going to happen, right? So you can't be unhappy with that happening in any kind of way. And I think I did mention to you guys that in the tradition of the university, of course, they are almost all of them affiliated with religion. Religion dominates universities in Western. Every single university in Europe was a Catholic university. That's just the way it worked. The public university actually is a new issue. That's a new thing. In fact, we're just about to discuss that. I don't know if I told you guys this, but I want you to know that there were at least some state universities prior to the Civil War. They were small, they were struggling, they were not where the distinguished students would go. They're going to go, of course, to the more famous colleges like Harvard or something like that, but there were at least some, okay? But what happens with the Civil War is you get a huge expansion of what we're going to call the state university, okay? Now, this happens because of the Civil War. The Civil War is a revolution in America. It's going to change a lot of things, and you guys all know that it ended slavery, of course. That becomes one revolutionary dynamic. It also creates a greater sense of unification and nationalism. That's an outcome too. But one of the more interesting results of the Civil War was that it freed the North from the South. It freed the North from the South. And I always like to imagine like that first moment in Congress after the South is seceded. So the first moment is like this, you know, oh my God, the Southerners all left. And the second moment is, oh my God, the Southerners left. You know, they got happy about that, okay? Because the Southerners were a pain in the butt, and they had held back the North from doing what they wanted to do. The North was always more progressive in attitude, you know, looking to the future, looking to all these kind of dynamics. And the Southerners had always been an anchor that had held them down. So I have a feeling that, you know, like one moment after, oh, I can't believe they left, it's, you know, party time. You know, we get to do whatever the hell we want. And you see the Congress almost going crazy with activity because, you know, no one's going to tell them no. So here's three things that they did. They had always wanted to do that they could never do because of the South. They had always wanted to build a transcontinental railroad. Now, of course, everyone wanted to build it, but they could never decide upon the route. The Southerners want the southern route, the Northerners want the northern route. Well, the South is gone. Screw them, right? Northern route. And that's the foundation. It's called the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862. And, of course, it's going to connect California. It's a critical event in California history. By the way, California history, really interesting class will be taught next fall in History 121. Not going to be in the schedule, but you look it up. It's going to be fun. Right? Sorry, I have to do that because it's not going to be in the schedule. Anyway, and of course, one of the stories I like the most is the story of the Transcontinental Railroad. It's a fun story to tell. Anyway, so that they got to build a railroad, okay? Another thing they wanted to do was what we call the homesteading. So the homesteading was allowing people to go out onto the Great Plains or whatever, of course, and to live on 160 acres or 320 acres of land for 5 years and gain control of it. And the Southerners always said no because they didn't like the idea that these are probably going to be free people moving into free lands. Well, the South is gone. Screw them. So 1862, they've got the Homestead Act. They're going to make this thing happen too, all right? The third and most important thing for us, of course, is that the Northerners had always wanted there to be some kind of a way that the federal government could help the states to create state-sponsored institutions of higher learning. They wanted to help the states to make state universities. And of course, the South had always been against it, you know. I can't believe that the Southerners would be against it, but they were against that also, right? So now they're not there, and of course, the North can do whatever the hell they want. So in 1862, just like everything else that happened in 1862, it passed something called the Morrill Act. It's Morrill. So it's not moral, the word, it's a person's name. So this is like the Dawes Act. I think this guy was a senator. So Senator Morrill will sponsor what will become known as the Morrill Act. And the Morrill Act is also known, and maybe this is more telling to us, as the Land Grant College Act. Land Grant College Act. Congress simply looked at the ways that they could they could try to help states to create state universities. So the thing that the government always has is land. The land is simply in the hands of lots of public lands in the hands of the federal government. So they simply decided to grant land to the states so the states could use that land to promote state-sponsored institutions of higher learning. The way they did this was through formula. That's often the way that they're going to do it, to kind of make it equitable in its own kind of way. So they were willing to grant to every state 30,000 acres of land per representative. So for the number of people you send to Washington, D.C., you get 30,000 acres of land. Does anyone know the minimum number of representatives for any given state in the Senate, in the Congress? So it's both the House and the Senate together. What's the minimum number you have to have? I'm holding the number behind my back right now. 2. It has to be more than 2 because there has to be 2 senators. So the number is 3. It's only 3. Okay. Some of you actually could see behind my back. That's pretty. How could you do that? Are you magic? Anyway, so 3 would be the minimum. Of course, you guys all know that almost every state is going to have more than that, right? They're going to have multiple members in the House of Representatives and, of course, 2 in the Senate, as everyone does. So it's a minimum of 90,000 acres, right? And for most states, significantly more. The federal government would give this land to the states, and of course they could do, remember it's all about local control in many ways. The state could do whatever it could do with that land. They could build the college or the university right on the land. You could do that if you wanted to, though generally not, because the lands were generally not in locations, of course, where you want to build a university. You could sell the land and use the revenues, of course, to create the foundation of the state university. You could lease the land, so you have a continuing income source that would allow you to sustain the university. And for some states, this will work out incredibly well. The lands that were leased were given to Texas ultimately were found to have lots of oil underneath them. Okay, so how wonderful for the University of Texas to get something like that. Okay, in some cases it worked out very well, some cases not quite so well. And of course, the government wasn't telling the state what to do. They're simply saying, here's our attempt to help you. You figure it out. You make this sucker work, all right? Because of this, let me just tell you the outcome. And here's one part of the outcome I do need to say. There were some pre-existent state universities. So, for instance, the University of Illinois was already there. University of Michigan was already there. University of Iowa was already there. So some of them are actually there already. And of course, now they're going to be enhanced. They're going to be empowered to do much more than they could do before. But the real outcome of the Morrill Act is what we call the new universities. These are the ones that are created. And they're created between 1862 and 1902. This is this huge state university creation era. And during that time, some 69 new universities are created. 69 of them, okay? And what you're seeing in this moment is the foundation of what will become the essence of higher education as far as the United States is concerned. This is the foundation of the state university system. Of course, they will become the dominant manifestation of higher. They will overwhelm the denominational college in no uncertain terms. These suckers are big, right? And they are going to educate America more than anyone else will. Now, I don't know if you know any of the new universities, and I think you know a lot of them. You just don't know that you know them, all right? And I want you to be aware of some of them that are coming into play here, all right? I have to start where I live, because this one becomes important to me and it's impacted my life. So can you guess what happened in California? What are they going to create out of the Land Grant College Act?
The universities.
We need to have it specifically.
UC San Diego.
Okay, but what was before UC San Diego?
Berkeley.
It's simply the University of California. Okay, so it was Berkeley in the very beginning. That was founded in 1879. It sometimes took time to get these things mobilized, of course. But you guys all know that in this foundation will become ultimately one of the great universities of the world. And if you look at the University of California as a system, it is the most prestigious large system of higher education in the entire world. There's none better than the entire system of the University of California, right? Admittedly, there are individual universities and locations, of course, that often are ranked higher, but no system in any way. And don't forget that, of course, for California, this is the beginning of an idea that in the 20th century will extend itself to the state university system also. So that will begin, that's Cal State, you guys all know, right? Cal State, San Marcos, right over yonder, essentially. And that will be extended in some ways to the community college system of California. Community colleges of California are the largest educating entity in the entire world. We educate more students in our community colleges than any other system in the entire world. So that's all. These are all pretty powerful things, right? Okay. All beginning though with this kind of notion of the foundation of public education. And if you put the three of them together, California community colleges, California State University System, University of California, no one can match that. No one in the entire world can match that. It's a pretty amazing thing when you think about it. Anyway, so California will create the University of California, but there are so many more that I want you to be aware of. The ones that I found, these are the ones that I thought, I had no idea that it would work like this. But in places like Massachusetts, there were no public institutions, even though they had all these famous colleges, you know, that they're famous for their colleges. So what comes out of the universities, we call it UMass, or the University of Massachusetts. You may have heard of it before. Right next to it, of course, a place called Connecticut, famous for Yale, but they had no public universities. So they're going to create what we call UConn, right? The University of Connecticut. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but this has become this extraordinary dynasty in women's basketball. There's nothing quite like UConn. In fact, it's almost kind of grotesquely unfair. They need to break that sucker up, that's all I can tell you. But if UCLA beats them, coming up here, that will be amazing. Anyway, of course they won't. Anyway, so these are some of them. Others that you may have heard of before, it's called the Ohio State University. You ever heard of that one before? Okay. Oklahoma State University, Iowa State University, Texas A&M University, Louisiana State University, Auburn University, Arizona State University, Oregon State University, Washington State. Have you ever heard of any of these? They're going to become incredibly famous, right? This is the essence of the educational system of the United States of America. So the new universities is just this explosion of these public universities that will begin to dominate as far as the United States is concerned. Now, critical characteristics I want you to be aware of. They were for the middle class. This is for middle class education. So this is not for the elite. It's not for the rich white men anymore. It's for the middle class. The basic notion that they created was that the universities should serve the top 10 percentile of the graduates of the public high schools of the state, of the particular state, okay? Because that is pretty much that has been the notion. It continues to this day. It's not always possible, right? If the state gets really, really big like California, the top 10%, so we might have to cut it to the top 8% or 6%, something like that. But that has always been the essential objective. Anyway, because it was for the middle class, and this is going to hurt you guys right now, and I'm so really sorry. It was free. They believed that this was a social contractual idea, that they should create higher education to serve the society. I want you to know that this does serve. It does serve, and it works. So if we allow for free public education up to the university level, it really benefits us. What's saying, of course, is that the larger community, the taxpayers, have to underwrite it, right? We have to pay for it, okay? But it creates such an amount of human capital that it just serves us. It serves the economy. It builds up you as the independent entity, of course, who go out and get the great job and all that kind of stuff, and you will then build up the economy and do all this kind of stuff. I mean, it has worked so well historically, if you look at what it has, the historical outcome. And one of the greatest times was after World War II. They come up with the GI Bill. They underwrite all these guys to go to college. Of course, just massive foundation for economic growth as far as America is concerned. I'm lucky enough to have been at the end of kind of the notion that it should be relatively free or inexpensive. So I paid nothing to go to community college. I always hate to tell you that one, but I paid $0 to go to community college. You have to pay a $3 health fee, and we had to buy our parking permit, and we did have to buy our books. I think the most expensive book I ever bought was $30, though, and often they were more like $15 or less than that, even essentially. I went to Cal State for $250 a semester. That's $500 a year. I went to the University of California for $350 per quarter. That's about $1,000 per year. So, just so different in the way it was. And the notion was that this will serve the society, and I believe it does. So, why do we go against that? There's all kinds of arguments here, including it's like a conservative reaction to the 1960s. The taxpayers did not like the idea that they were paying for students who start protesting, burning down buildings and protesting. There's something to that. There's a powerful conservative movement against public education in America. You have to look at it. It's obviously there, one way or the other. Our new Secretary of Education pretty much doesn't like public education. It kind of shows us, the dynamic here. Anyway, I just wish we would get back to the social contractual idea that we should be paying. I should, as a taxpayer, be paying for you guys to be educated. And it will serve me and everybody else too. Yes.
Like Palomar is offering that beginning, I believe, next year. Like they just launched a program called Palomar Promise that will offer free 2 years for the graduates of San Marcos and some Espanol high schools.
Good. That's what we should be doing. So anyway, I want you to know it's for the middle class, of course, and they created it as a free process for those that would be involved. Another powerful idea was that it was co-educational. So what does that mean? For women too. Okay, so men and women coming together. This was controlled by the individual states. I do need you to know that. So among other things, that does mean that not every state would allow for women to come. So the southern states routinely said no. The North, the West, the far West all said yes. So you see coeducation throughout much of the United States with the exception of the southern area. I think the University of Mississippi finally became co-educational in the 1970s. It took them a while to figure that stuff out. It's always intriguing to me. They were also open to all Americans. They could not discriminate, of course. And that is not going to function again totally, especially in the American South, right? But there were also other kind of tools that they would never get themselves in a position to be able to get into college. You do find African Americans going to, like, the University of Michigan, University of Nebraska. You see them, okay? You can look in the yearbooks of 1900, and there are very few of them, but they are there. The problem that they had more was just kind of overcoming these social economic barriers that would allow them to become part of the top 10%, of course, of high school students or something like that. And in many ways, those were often insurmountable, extraordinarily difficult. But there was at least the potential of an integrated university appearing in America for the first time. Right? Now, the last thing I need you to know about the university was their intent. And I told you those old colleges, denominational colleges, were about classical education and moral edification. Now, obviously, because they were public schools, they could not have a church affiliation. So the argument would be that they were not about moral edification. And that's not exactly true, but it's kind of true, right? Because you went to these colleges and you partied down. They're sort of like, where do you learn immorality? San Diego State. It'll teach you really quick, okay, whatever you need to know. Anyway, but that wasn't the goal, of course. And of course they would provide the access to a classical education. They will teach you Greek and Latin and literature and history and other worthless things like that. I mean, they have that stuff, okay? But they created this kind of new dynamic of attitude and intent. And I'm going to give you the mission statement because it tells you everything you need to know. The mission statement of the universities, and I have a feeling it was actually put in the Moral Act, and they simply had to, of course, replicate that at the colleges, was what they called the gathering and dissemination of useful knowledge. The gathering and dissemination of useful knowledge. Gathering and dissemination of useful knowledge. Let's parse this just a little bit. So who does the gathering? Who gathers the knowledge? Professors. The professors are there. You guys know that they're not just about teaching, right? They're also researching in their field, trying to create the new information that is necessary. And then how do they disseminate?
Teaching.
They walk into the classroom and they spread it all out. I've gathered it to myself and spread out. So you guys are thinking about this class and you're going, okay, Chris, we've had the class for a long time. When is the useful knowledge going to come out? About 2 weeks, I think I'll have some useful knowledge for you guys. I haven't been able to get much right now for 2 weeks. Anyway, so it's all about the gathering and dissemination of useful knowledge. And the intent was very powerful. These colleges were designed to advance the society. They are there for the benefit of the public will, to do good for their states, essentially. And you see it right away in the very beginning of these colleges in powerful ways. Anyone know what the original intent of the University of California was? What were they really going to try to support big time in California? And to give you a hint, you still see it powerfully at Davis, UC Davis, and UC Riverside. It was all about agriculture, okay? These guys were there to promote California agriculture, and they did so in a very aggressive way. The University of California, Riverside was begun as a citrus experimentation system, just a little place there on a hillside to figure out how to help them to grow navel oranges and stuff like that, okay? And from it, of course, will blossom ultimately the University of California, the university itself. 22,000 people go to UCR now. When I was there were 3,000, like little teeny place, and kabam, it's often gotten really big. Kind of hurt. And it is in many ways a very impressive institution, to say the least. Anyway, so this was this kind of intent. You hear it kind of in the names of the institution. Georgia Technical Institute, right, of promoting technology. Texas A&M, you guys know what that A&M stands for? Agricultural and Mechanical, okay? So they're kind of almost telling you what we're there to promote very pragmatic and practical things for the advancement of the entire society. And the last thing I need you to know, these universities are being built up. It takes time to build a university. It's not like you can just snap your fingers and make it happen. They are built up. And you get the first flood of graduates right about the turn of the century. Okay, so here they start to flow out. And every time they left those universities, they were told exactly what had happened. We brought you here for free. And we expect something, right? We expect you to take the useful knowledge that we have given to you, and we want you to go out there into that world, and we want you to fix the problems of this world. That powerful kind of sense of, you have a mission. We have given you the opportunity. We have given you the talents and the abilities. You need to go out there, and you need to deal with all the issues. And that's still the end game of education. I hope you guys know it. I want that to be said to every single student who ever, we have given you what we have in hopes that you will go out and improve the well-being of the world, in whatever you can do. But I do believe that in the progressive era, at that moment, that these are highly inspired people, and they think to themselves, they gave me an education. I've got to serve. I've got to serve the public. And so you see them heading out, of course, into the world, and they become another, as I told you, source of the reform impulse, a powerful one. I'm going to tell you, as I tell you the stories, many of these people are university graduate people. They are heading out there saying, I've got to fix it. I've got to deal with it. We've got problems in America. Let us go out there and do the best we possibly can. So this becomes one other powerful motivating factor. In the long run of the story, though, it doesn't even really, it matters about motivation, but we want to know, what did they do? If they had done nothing, there's no story, right? But we need to know what they did. So I call this the reform activities. What are they actually going to do? And this is not only the essence of the progressive era, but is the essential component of your essay response, right? I'm going to ask you, what did they do? That's what I want to know, because if they didn't do anything, there's no story to be told. They do a ton, and you're going to feel kind of mad at me when we get to the end of this, because there's so many things that they will do. But I want you to know that we have to kind of subdivide and compartmentalize a little bit to understand what exactly happened in the progressive era. So the two major divisions of my presentation are, I first want to tell you about individuals. These are simply people inspired by the moment, of course, seeing the problems of America, who want to do something about it. And we see them, and it's cool that they did so. They kind of explode on the scene, heading out into America and doing what they can to kind of fix the problems. And of course they could do something, but they couldn't do everything, because it's just individuals against huge problems. So ultimately the progressives will begin to bring together, coalesce into their activity, and they'll simply focus upon what I'm going to call the governing apparatus. It's always our hope as Americans that the government will serve us, right, and should do what we want it to do. And so the progressives thought that way, and so they simply began to move upon the government, getting people elected to serve, do the things they wanted to do, and the government becomes ultimately the expression of progressivism. The more important things come from the governing apparatus, of course, than from individuals, simply because it's America. And I will show you that there are levels of expression here. So the cities did their progressive reforms, then the states did their reforms, And then ultimately we had the federal government becoming, in the same kind of mindset of progressivism and doing what it can do. And of course, through all of that, you would at least hope significant changes, significant reforms, significant improvements for America. And I'll give you some sense of exactly how this all will work itself out. I want to start with the individuals, though. They're simply people. They were inspired by the problems who decided to rise up and do something about it. I must confess to you guys that I am not a significant activist. My primarily activities have been writing letters to the editor, giving money to organizations that I would support. That's the lame person's activism, right? I'll just give them some money, they'll do something about it, that kind of thing. I guess besides that, of course, I have the bully pulpit of being a teacher, and whatever, if there's something that really bothers me. But I shouldn't really do that when you think about it. I should never tell my students any kind of political way to vote, and I haven't really. Of course, if you listen to me long enough, you know that I have leanings, and I can't help myself in those regards. But that's the most I can do, is maybe influence you in a subtle kind of way to think some way and do something. And I hope that all of you become activists. Don't be like me, lazy and sitting at home writing checks. That doesn't do anything. And a lot of you are. People engaged in marches and do that kind of thing. And I really do admire those people. I love the tree huggers, or the people that chain themselves to something that they don't want to be destroyed. That's a cool person right there, right? And there's always going to be that kind of person, and thank God for them. Okay, that's all I can say. And they were just simply going to appear as far as the progressive era. So let me tell you about some of the just people, the individuals who began to do certain things. One area that they began to be active is in this area that we call social welfare. And social welfare was kind of an invention of the moment. It's something that really began to appear in America at this time. And it was those concerned, of course, with the well-being of people within the society and wanting to do something about that. So many things are rooted in the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is the foundation of modern America. I've told you that already a bunch of times, and of course I'm going to keep saying it in a variety of ways. But one thing that happened in the Gilded Age is we began to see much more apparent poverty. So the poverty of modern America really begins to appear in the Gilded Age. I'm not going to tell you everything that comes out of the Gilded Age is good. In fact, I've already told you a whole bunch of crap comes out of it, right? And this is one of that components of crap. Poverty really became an issue in America in the Gilded Age. It was always there, but it was like a rural poverty that was kind of hard to see, that could hide out in the rural areas, and you just kind of couldn't see it so well. But everything about the Gilded Age kind of enhances the apparency of poverty. And so we see it, for instance, as a result of immigration. You guys all know that immigrants are at risk to be poor. That's kind of the problem, right, that we're worried about. If the only immigrants who came to America were those who moved right into high-tech jobs, and no one's going to have a problem with that, right? Doctors coming to America. It is really tragic when you think about it. I mean, we get some of the best doctors in the world because they want to come here, because this is where the big money in medicine is. Other places have rational systems of medicine where doctors do not have to become rich. Who wants to work at that one? You come to America where you make the big bucks. And we also get people that are technologically skilled, the best computer minds. And of course, you guys all know that these big computer companies, they're freaking out if they can't get them to come to America, right? It's an essential part of their business to have these guys come and work for them in a variety of different ways. Anyway, we don't care about them coming, right? The rich people coming, great, It's the poor people. It's the poor people that are coming here who are at risk to become even poor. And of course, immigration just kind of enhances the potential of being poor. You don't speak the language. You have no family ties or anything like that. You're just at risk, really, to become a problem as far as America is concerned. So immigration is occurring. Immigration is enhancing the presence of poverty. Urbanization is an enhancement of poverty simply by concentrating it so you see it, of course. It's just right there in front of you. There are 90,000 homeless people in LA. 90,000. That's like a small city, right? It's almost the size of Escondido, for crying out loud. Never forget driving down Main Street in LA. Took a wrong turn. I was on Skid Row. Oh, whoa! It's like entering into a very interesting and problematic situation. And it's very apparent for you, to say the least. Industrialization, of course, with the kind of that jagged kind of activity of the economy where they have the recessions, depressions, that simply enhance poverty. If you lose your job, you're at risk to be poor in a huge kind of way. So what the Gilded Age did, among other things, is make poverty apparent in America, and of course, that's going to inspire certain people. And as they responded against poverty, they moved to create this kind of social welfare movement to try to do what they could, of course, to mitigate that particular problem. And one of those who becomes like a real promoter of this particular activity in the progressive era, a pioneer really in social welfare, was a woman by the name of Jane Addams. And of course, Jane Addams is going to become a potential identification. Addams with two D's. Is that how they did in the Addams family? She could have been related to Cousin Ed. Cousin Ed could have been her cousin. How cool is that? That's cousin Ed. No, you wouldn't say that, would you? Anyway, Jane Addams. Now, before I tell you about Jane Addams, I hate these little things that I have to do, but I feel like I have to do them, so I'm going to do it. Right? Sorry about that. In the 1980s, the first President Bush, so this is Herbert Walker, I can't remember how they do that, Bush, the older one, was President of the United States. And he called for a commission to study the way we teach American history in the public schools of America. And you can imagine, this is the kind of conservative person who's probably worried about the way American history is being taught in the public school, who wanted to find out exactly what's going on. So he created a commission, and they studied the way it was taught, primarily focusing on K through 12, so that was their focus, but they also dealt with community colleges and public universities. They wanted to find out, how do we teach history in America? And of course, I had no idea this was going on. I'm just, living my life or whatever. I think I was in graduate school at that time. But one day, the report came out, and the report was mentioned in the newspaper. So I'm reading through the newspaper, and I see about this commission to study U.S. history. And I'm like, everyone else is going to pass that by, but this is my life. So I'm like, whoa, what's going on here, okay? So I read the story about the report, trying to look at the report and get the highlights. And the report was highly critical of the way we teach American history. They did not like the way that American history was taught in the United States of America, in the public schools, in the community colleges, and in the university also. So, of course, I had to read, what's wrong? What are we doing wrong? That kind of thing. So I'm reading through the report. Now, there were two things that they were very critical. And here's number one. They said that American history is taught in the public schools of the United States, colleges and university, as criticism of the American past. That's what they said. It's like a critique of the American past. So they're endlessly sort of criticizing what Americans had done in the past. Now, just for fun, let's do a little quick analysis of how I've taught the class so far, okay? So we started with Reconstruction. All of you guys remember how that went. Damn those Southerners for the bad things that they were doing to bad people, okay? Damn the federal government because they didn't do enough. I mean, look at this. They could have given them 40 acres and a mule, but what did they do? Nothing, Anyway, it's true, right? I'm criticizing them for doing that. And then, of course, we move into the Gilded Age, and damn those miners for tearing up the environment. I can't believe that. And damn those guys for killing all those longhorns. They could have just lived a nice life out there with longhorns. And I'm just kidding. I didn't really criticize them for that. But then I got to the Indians, of course, and I'm like, I want you guys to be crying after Wounded Knee. Oh my God, they killed them all. What a I am being critical of those kind of behaviors. And then, of course, we moved to the rise of big business. Oh my God, they created monopolies and trusts and tried to, are you hearing this? And of course, then I went to the workers, the trauma of transition, the responses to industrial oppression, the poor workers. I can't believe how mean we were. It's true. It's so funny. I get through all that kind of stuff, and I go, oh gosh, I guess that's what I'm doing here. When I was a kid, this is the anti-war period, or anti-Vietnam, anti-war. There came out a bumper sticker that was "Love it or leave it." So you either love America as it is, or you get the hell out of here. That was the basic attitude. Okay, So that means you can't even be critical of anything. And then came out like a counter bumper sticker that said, love it and change it. And I believe, I do believe that I'm an American patriot. I love America. I've dedicated my entire life to studying it endlessly, and talking about it endlessly. So am I to be seen as an unpatriotic person, an un-American? My notion is, though, that America has done a lot of bad things. A lot of good things, too. I hope I at least give you some sense of that, too. But, it's done a lot of bad things. And I want us to know about that. I don't want to be floating through this notion that we are just the land of the free and the home of the brave, and everything's wonderful about America. Everything's really great about America in many ways, but we have some serious issues and problems. I can't help myself but tell you guys. So I do not believe that I'm being unpatriotic in what I'm doing. But I remember reading that and going, that's pretty much what I do. Exactly right. The second thing they said, though, this one kind of hurt me a little bit. They said, because everything that was done in the past is negative, then there are no heroes in the story. And that becomes kind of true, right? George Washington is a damn slave owner, right? Abraham Lincoln was a racist. He was a racist. I can give you the little quotes of Abraham Lincoln that are I do not believe that white people and black people can live together. Now, the thing about Abraham Lincoln we don't know is he seemed to be changing his mind before he dies, before he's killed. So who knows the outcome of that particular one. But, I am, critical of Thomas Edison, though I admired him too. I hope you guys heard that. Critical of John D. Rockefeller, but I kind of admired him too. We are often critical of these people in the past, and that made me feel bad because I thought you go through the entire historical story of the United States, and all of them are a bunch of bad guys. And that's not cool, and that's not true either, right? So I began to kind of evaluate that issue, and what I came up with was that I have heroes in my story. It's just not the heroes they want. They want the heroes to be the presidents and the generals, okay? But I have different heroes. My heroes are the freedmen who are trying to do everything they possibly can to, they're heroic in terms of their activity. My heroes are the longhorns who are struggling against everything to try to get their horns north. My heroes are the buckaroos. My heroes are Tatanka Iotake or Wovoka, trying to deal with the issue. There are lots of really good American heroes, and I hope you'll know that they're there, okay? And if you don't know, I'm about to present to you guys an American hero. Her name was Jane Addams. I mean, she's a credible hero. You need a hero, I got him for you, okay? I got him in spades, essentially. Let me tell you the story of Jane Addams. She is an American hero. She was born in 1860, and she was born to a prominent and wealthy family in Springfield, Illinois. And the prominence of her family can be shown in the fact that her father was a close personal friend of Abraham Lincoln. They knew Abraham Lincoln in a fairly close way. And one of the outcomes of this was that Abraham Lincoln visited the parents after she was born to kind of, congratulate them. And Abraham Lincoln held Jane Addams in his arms. He held Jane Addams. Can you imagine that kind of story? That is a cool family story. Well, honey, when you were a baby, Abraham Lincoln held you. Of course she can't remember that kind of stuff. I love being able to tell my daughters the stories of their life before they're cognizant of it, okay? We took Allie across country when she was, I think, 13 months old. She was just beginning to walk and everything, so we took her all the way to Washington, D.C., through Mississippi. And all these interesting things happened. Of course, she has no recollection of all, but I tell them to her, so they become sort of her. And there was a time when I was having her feed the geese, and a 13-month-old is about that tall, right? So she's got bread, and I thought it was going to work out okay, but all of a sudden Allie is surrounded by this just massive bunch of geese, a gaggle of geese, is that what you're supposed to say? And I was going, oh crap, I'm reaching into the gaggle and lifting my little daughter out of the middle of it to try to get away from it. She tripped and fell on the steps of the Virginia State Capitol in Richmond, really cut her knee badly. I remember just a little jagged brick or something sticking out. Walking down the hallway in the Capitol building in Montgomery, Alabama, we're walking, Allie was just kind of on her own. She liked to walk down a little bit. And this lady, this really nicely dressed professional woman comes out of an office to walk down the hall. Allie reaches up and grabs her hand, and the two of them are walking down the hall. And the lady was just, she thought it was adorable. Oh my God, that was cute to get to hold your hand. Anyway, little moments that she doesn't know about, of course, that I remember absolutely. She did not know, she could not remember being held, but of course they would tell, it became part of family lore. She would never get to see him again. You guys all know that, right? Because the next time he came home to Springfield, Illinois, he came in a box 5 years later. So that was her little tear down the cheek. But anyway, Jane Addams, prominent family. You can be rich, of course, and prominent, but be miserable. I'm sure you guys all know that, okay? And so in many ways, when I look at the early life of Jane Addams, I see kind of a misery here. Her mother died at a very early age. That's got to be a hard blow for a kid. Her dad was almost excessively doting upon her to the point where I think he may have kind of compounded some of her health problems and stuff like that. It's almost like that von Munchausen syndrome. You heard of that? Where it's like you want them to be sick, so you're endlessly taking care of them or something like that. And he seemed to be overprotective. Secret garden problem, if you know what that whole story is all about, right? Anyway. She described herself in her own autobiography as an ugly, sick, bent-back little girl. She describes kind of a misery there. I'm not going to accept her ugly claim that anyone can see themselves in some kind of public light. She does seem to be sickly. She was bent back. You guys know what that's going to mean? What is that suggesting? Scoliosis. She suffered from that, of course. That became just one. So, rich, but not necessarily a happy child in any kind of way. Her father provided her with everything he could, of course. He sent her to women's, what do they call those? The female academies? That's what they're called. Seminars, female seminars. It was a sort of moral equivalent of a college, but more of a finishing school for rich young ladies and stuff like that. So whatever she wanted, she would have. So it's a provided for life, of course, but not necessarily a wonderful life. Well, right about the time she reaches the age of her maturity, 20, her father dies. And he leaves her as a wealthy heiress, but with no objective in life or knowledge. She'd been protected her entire life and really didn't know what to do with herself. So she did what her friends and family told her to do, and that was to take the grand tour of Europe. That's what rich young Americans would do. So it's kind of an edification thing, but also something that they would just do. So she goes to Europe. They primarily wanted her to go to the spas, for her health, and she did the spa thing for a while, take the waters, do a mud bath, whatever, okay? But she got bored, as you can imagine, and she was attracted to the cities. I think we all are, she wanted to go to London, she wanted to go to Paris, she wanted to go to Rome. These are the places where things are happening. And it was in London particularly where she ran into kind of something that would set her life. These are rich people, of course, and they interact with other rich people, so she's hanging out with wealthy women, English women, and they were doing things where they would go into the inner city of London to try to help to alleviate the poverty of the poor. They would help people, all right? And for some reason, it really caught on with her. She said, this is something I can do with my life. I can use my wealth and position to help the poor. And she pretty much will dedicate the rest of her life to this particular objective. I mean, she just decided upon it, and that's what she's going to do. So she came back to America. She's a little naive. She seemed to think that the poverty of Europe was much greater than the poverty of America, and maybe to a degree it was. But there was significant poverty in America. She comes back to Chicago, and she's going, oh my God, we have a lot of poor people too, you know. They were here. So this becomes her essential objective. She begins her quest in 1889. So you see I'm kind of messing with you guys, that some of this stuff happens a little before the period. It's actually a classic Gilded Age moment. Whenever I see this date, I'm thinking to myself, of course, that's the birth date of Adolf Hitler. I was thinking, you know, if there's a time travel issue, should we time travel back 1880 and just snuff him in the crib, you know? It seems so bad, you know, like I don't think, here's what I would do. I want to take a more humane approach to the whole issue. He goes to Vienna, of course, after his mother dies, and he wants to become an artist, but he can't get into one of those academies. So I'm just going to go there and pay his tuition to go to the academy, you know. The end result is one more bad artist and one less megalomaniacal killer, you know. Or, yeah, I don't know if it'll work out that way, but I'm going to assume that it would, you know. So should I snuff him out as a baby, or should I just make sure that he becomes a bad artist? I think I'll go with the artist.
You could keep his parents from meeting.
We could do that. There's too many time travel shows right now. Yeah, everything goes, oh my God. But then all of a sudden you go back in time and your parents are going, what the hell? Was I related to Adolf? Anyway, just one other thing about that year, in case you guys are wondering, you know, that's the birthday of Franklin Roosevelt, too. They're born in the same year. So lives that will begin to interact. Here's what she did. This is what Jane Addams did in 1889. She went to Chicago, and she bought this old, decrepit mansion called Hull House. And Hull House had been built by a man by the name of Hull, I think it was like 1854, and it was an old farmhouse that he built outside of the city of Chicago, but then the city just grew and expanded, as I told you, of course, became bigger and bigger, and by the time we get to 1889, Hull House is in the middle of a very poor slum tenement area of immigrants. You know, sitting there kind of as an awkward remnant of the past on its own little piece of land, but it's surrounded by tenements all over the place. Well, Jane Addams, using her wealth, will come into this area, purchase Hull House, and decide to turn it into something that she can use to serve the people, serve the poor people of that particular neighborhood. Now, just a little comment on Jane. She never married, okay, but she did have a lifetime companion by the name of Ellen Starr. What does this mean exactly, of course? I cannot tell you. These are private people, of course, you know, in the Victorian era. Could it have been homosexuality? Of course it could have been, you know. Could it have just been a very intense Victorian relationship between women? It could have been that too. Those are the kind of things that we just don't necessarily know. But, you know, surrounding herself kind of with other women, thinking in many ways that this was something that these women could do, and probably not wanting to be interfered with by men also. I almost think of the Elizabeth I thing, you know, you can't marry anybody because you don't want a husband taking away your power in that kind of way. But ultimately, you know, she would attract other women. There were usually about 22 that would be there as just individuals who would come to become part of the process. And these women would try to do everything they possibly could, of course, to enhance the local population. When she moved in, the locals were very suspicious. Wouldn't you be? Some rich lady coming up in her carriage, you know, dumping off all her fine stuff, and in the middle of a tenement, what the hell are you doing here? That kind of thing, all right? And it took her a long time, but she began to reach out to the community, to the population, to show that she was benign and benevolent, and she wanted to help them in whatever way she could. And she turned Hull House into what they described as a settlement house. I think that this actually comes from England. And this was just a word to use as a location within the poor community, which there would be assistance offered in a variety of ways. The first thing she did, kind of a slow and gradual build here. But the first thing she did was offer childcare. This was something that was very much in need. These women often had no chance, of course, to do what they needed to do without their children there. And so childcare generally, of course, but that exploded or expanded into a nursery school. They took a corner of the yard and made it into a playground so the kids could come there and play. I don't know exactly what's going on today, but when I was teaching this class, the very beginning of my career, this would have been in the 1980s, a young girl raised her hand, a woman raised her hand. She said, I lived in Chicago as a child, and I went to Hull House for nursery school. And I thought, you're kidding. You know, it was still a functioning nursery school into the 1970s at least, which I found very interesting. If it's still there today, I'd be amazed by that. Anyway, so first it starts as a nursery school. The second thing she did was she reached out to abused and battered women. This was a real big problem in this area, okay? There were a lot of people just getting the crap beat out of them on a routine basis. We call it trickle-down misery, trickle-down misery. So this is the man being pretty much abused, of course, in the industrial situation and being frustrated by it, of course, and feeling powerless and emasculated by it one way or the other. And, here's the worst case scenario. He gets paid on whatever, Saturday, right? He's got money in his pocket. He's going to stop by at the local saloon because he wants to get a drink. He's got a little money, wants to get a drink. Well, pretty soon that's 4 drinks, and pretty soon he's buying around for everybody, and pretty soon he has no money in his pocket at all, okay? So he goes home, he's drunk, of course. His wife said, where's the money? He's wasted all, and of course he's not going to be happy with her criticizing him for that, so he begins to beat her up. The kids get beaten up, it just ends up this kind of cycle of degradation and misery, horrible situation. And Jane Addams wanted to try to put at least some kind of a stop to let women come out of that abusive environment, let them come to a place of refuge where they would be taken care of course, and protected at least for some period of time. She expanded it to begin to offer educational facilities for the local community. Probably the most important thing they did were ESL classes. Of course, they wouldn't have called it that, but I'm going to call it that. English as a second language, because there were a lot of immigrants in the community who did not know how to speak English, and this would be a way to enhance their language skills. One of my favorite pictures from Hull House is a picture of a classroom clearly made for little kids, all right? It reminds me of when you would go to like the parent-teacher conference in the first grade classroom, and of course the teacher has us sitting down in chairs that are for little kids. So I'm sitting down and my knees are up around my chin. Could we have an adult chair? I think they do that on purpose. So like the teacher's up here and your parents are down. Don't mess with me. Don't criticize anything I do as far as your kid is concerned. Anyway, but these big men are sitting in their work clothes and their work boots on little chairs, late at night, and trying to learn English as best they possibly can. She was very much an elite person, so she brought orchestras into the poor people. She brought Shakespearean play. I mean, I love that part of it, and it's not a bad idea, right? It's never bad to be exposed to culture in its various forms, I think that's a good idea, but I'm not exactly sure that's the issue. She provided a pantry of food, of course, for those that were in need. They could come to find food if they didn't have it anywhere else. She had kitchens, so if they needed to come in, of course, and to use the kitchen facility, she could do that. She made it into a job clearinghouse, to find the jobs that were in the local area that she could begin to supply. And just one thing after another. And when they reached the peak, or the pinnacle of activity, they were serving 2,000 people a day. That's pretty impressive when you think about it. 2,000 people a day were making women, children, adults, of course, making their way through Hull House, receiving a variety of different services. Addams ultimately, of course, committed to so much more than just the Hull House. She wanted to clean up the entire area. And one of my enduring images of Jane Addams, she's walking behind these big wagons, picking up all the garbage. She could not stand the garbage in the area. Typical kind of elite person, wants it all to be nice and neat if she possibly can. She became an advocate for immigrant rights. She was an advocate for labor rights. She wanted to help the workers as much as she could. She became an advocate for African American rights. In fact, she became a charter member of the NAACP. I'll tell you more about this later. That's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She's a charter member. She began part of this organization, of course, to become critical for the African American community. She was a feminist. I hope you get that. She clearly wanted to promote the rights of women in every way she possibly could. She saw social welfare as an area that women could dominate, and they did. The problem for men with social welfare was the money flow was wrong, right? The money flow is out. Men want the money flow to come back in, so they allowed the women to do this. Though once it became part of the governing apparatus, the men wanted it back, right? Once there's power, they want it back, so they're going to push the women aside. She was looking for an area where women could express themselves outside of the household, outside of the domestic sphere, and of course she would find this. And ultimately she became an advocate for peace, world peace, and indeed she won the Nobel Peace Prize in the 1930s. You all know that that's a big deal, right? That's pretty much perceived as the #1 important international prize in our world, Nobel Peace Prize. Advocate for global peace in one way or the other. Before she died in the 1930s, of course, world famous. Among those, her fans were Leo Tolstoy. You guys know Leo Tolstoy, the War and Peace? I don't know why, but he became fascinated with her. He had to meet her and all this kind of stuff. She attracted that kind of attention. She also wrote a book, multiple books. One was My 20 Years at Hull House, national bestseller, trying to get a sense of all the various things that she had done. Anyway, dedicating her life to the uplifting of the people, the poor people of the community, of course. How can we not see her as a heroic person? She's just amazing in many ways, yes.
whole house is still standing. It's amazing.
All right, and I think it's on the campus of the university. Is that correct? Did you see
I
that?
didn't get that far.
Okay.
I was listening.
Anyway, so here, this is someone, and of course, someone who is an example of the progressive, the individual really trying to reform America. Remember that she couldn't do that much. It's really not that much. 2,000 people out of a city of millions, of course, out of a nation of multi-millions. All she really hoped was she would become an example for others to do the same thing, and it happened. There will be settlement houses in Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. Other places will emulate what she did, so that does become important. Another person who's really important, and I also perceive as a hero, but much more controversial than Jane Addams, as far as American history and world history is concerned, was a woman by the name of Margaret Sanger. So she's also part of this kind of general social welfare dynamic. When I tell you this story, you're going to see that there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily as kosher as you want them to be for a hero, but still critically important, and I believe really more of an impact globally than even Jane Addams was concerned. So here we are, Margaret Sanger. Potential identification. You know how we are kind of the products of our parents in an interesting way, sort of? So when I think of my own parents, and you guys are probably too young to really do an analysis of this, but what is the impact of your parents upon you in your entire life? So I perceive both my mom and my dad as both having very positive and very negative impacts upon me. There's a high level of ambiguity. So my dad, for instance, was a community college teacher with a beard. So you think that might have influenced me in any particular kind of way? He taught English, though. I said, screw that, Dad. I'm going to be a revolutionary, man. I'm going to teach history. I'm going to go a very different road than you are. Anyway, and so that, powerful potty. I saw his life, and I really liked his life, and I wanted to emulate that. My dad also, though, was a smoker, and he was overweight. And those were two things that I thought were very problematic, negatively impacting his health. And so I pretty much said, I'm not going to do that at all. I want to go a very different road there. My mom, it's so nurturing, so wonderful in so many ways. She loved music. She sang endlessly. She played the guitar. And of course, she just brought me into kind of that world of her music. And I wanted to sing and I wanted to play guitar. That was really cool. It was so funny. I was playing my guitar for my students one time. And a student came up to me and said, who are your influences? And I'm saying, my mom? What do you want me to say, the Beatles or something like that? Anyway, it was so funny. But my mom is a terrible house. My dad's dead, my mom's still alive. And I don't know why, it really bugged me. It's like I didn't want my friends to come over. It's not that our house was that bad, but she just didn't care. She didn't think that was important. And that's kind of a component of life. And maybe it's not important, I don't know. But it's intriguing to me that, of course, I married a woman who was absolutely fastidious, and our house is always perfect. You can come to our house any time of the day or night. It's going to be fine. Okay? I'm never going to have a worry whatsoever of you walking into my house. And just the opposite. Like friends would come over at my house when I was a kid, and I'm like, oh, you really want to come in here? I don't think that's a good idea. Let's stay outside in the front lawn. Anyway, so my parents, influenced me in positive ways and negative ways. It's sort of the way it works, I think, in a right way. So I really think Margaret Sanger is an example of this. So here's her story. She was born, I'm pretty sure, gosh, I can't remember exactly. I think we're looking at about, 1870 or something like that. So she's a generation later than, a little more than a generation later than Jane Addams. She was born into an Irish immigrant family, both parents were from Ireland. Her father was this Irish immigrant who came to America with a kind of he was very much a free thinker and a free speaker. He was a socialist, and this was pre-revolutionary, Russian revolutionary socialism, so I think much more idealistic, all about social justice, economic equality, stuff like that. So, he's kind of a radical, and I think he gave to his daughter a sort of radical political perspective. But at the same time that he was a free thinker, he was also a free drinker, a very seriously free drinker. And the image that I have of poor little Margaret Sanger is that she's endlessly having to go to the saloon to try to get Daddy to come home, right? And it began to be kind of an image of existence, at least in her mind, for men, that men were not dependable people, that you had to make it on your own. You had to figure out your own kind of route. And I think her father both maybe gave her a sense of radicalism, but also the problems with men, for women with men in their lives, that kind of thing. Her mother, I can't really tell you the positive dynamic. I'm sure whatever that was, she loved her mom. I know that for sure. But here's the thing about her mom that really influenced Margaret Sanger. Her mother died at the age of 42, which of course is not common in those days. That was very common, I should say. This is about life expectancy. She died from tuberculosis, and that of course is not uncommon either. This is a scourge of that era, essentially. So nothing about that seems unusual in any kind of way. But Margaret was convinced that something else had killed her, something else had broke her body down. And what that something else was that she had had 18 pregnancies over the course of her life. She had been pregnant 18 times. Does anyone remember what we call that in History 101? Unencumbered fecundity. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is a relatively common phenomenon of colonial America, antebellum period. Nothing to encumber the fecundity, so nothing either cultural or technological to get in the way of being pregnant at every single opportunity. The average colonial woman averaged 10 pregnancies. You guys know that? I mean, that's pretty amazing. That's the average, right? So that means that some are averaging more. They're doing more than 10 pregnancies, right? To create an average of 10. You know, this is just the way it was in those days. You know, the classic Irish Catholic family, you know, baby after baby after baby. 18, though, seems exceptional to me, okay? 18. And not only did she have 18 pregnancies, but only 11 lived to maturity to some degree. So that means not only is she suffering from all these pregnancies, but she's enduring infant mortality, you know, time and time again. That's 7 infant mortalities. I do not think that those were miscarriages either. I think these children came to birth and they will die sometime. And that, of course, is also kind of a common phenomenon of pre-modern society. Jane was convinced that her mother was worn down physically, emotionally, spiritually, in every way you could think of by the endless number of pregnancies she had to endure. And of course, this will very much influence her life in a variety of different ways. You know, the parents are just having their kind of powerful impact. Margaret Sanger kind of goes to college. Not exactly. She went to nursing school, and this is something that people were increasingly doing. And she comes out of that, you know, it's kind of more like going to community college. It was a nursing school, a 2-year program that would allow her to be whatever the licensing was at that particular level. And so she becomes a nurse. And she became a nurse in the inner city of New York City. So she's dealing primarily with poor people. And so she began to see also other women suffering like her mother. All these immigrant women coming to her who had had 8 children already and were pregnant again. And they're crying their eyes out. You know, they're telling her, I am exhausted every day. I can't take care of these kids. We don't have enough time or energy for another kid. And I'm pregnant again. So she's hearing the woes of unencumbered fecundity of these women having to suffer that. And that, of course, influenced her. But I think what influenced her more was that some of these women, of course, decided they didn't want to have that baby, right? And they wanted to do something about it. This is an essential historical reality, so at least be willing to listen to this. There have always been abortions, okay? There have always been abortions. And the question really is, are the abortions legal or illegal? If they're legal, they're done in one particular way, which hopefully is, you know, relatively safe. If they are legal, they're illegal, they're still done, right? They're still done, but they're often done, of course, in the outlaw realm with all kinds of potential consequences. So that means you're going to go to some quack, or they're going to tell you to consume some kind of a thing, of course, and those things can both kill you one way or the other. But we have this sense of Margaret Sanger being a nurse, and they're coming upon these women who have tried to self-abort. And in their self-abortion, of course, it has gone horribly wrong, and the woman's bleeding to death. You know, she just began to, all this is piling up in her head, as you can, the problem for her mother, the problem for these women, the deaths by those that are trying to abort themselves, you know, piling up. And just one last thing. She got married, she marries this guy, they have 3 kids, and on the 3rd child, the pregnancy was just awful and life-threatening, basically, life-threatening. And the doctors pretty much said to Margaret Sanger, you cannot have another child. Another pregnancy could kill you. So, you know, all this is kind of coming together. At some point, it simply manifests in the mind of Margaret Sanger to embark upon a one-woman campaign to simply try to do something about this. And so what she wanted to do, here's her ultimate cause, was to separate sexual intercourse from procreation. Yes, you can have sex, and it's intriguing that this is part of her story. She liked to have sex. She wanted to have sex, you know, but she didn't want to have the potential outcome of pregnancy associated with that. So she wanted to, you know, she knew you could. You can separate sexual intercourse from procreation. And so she became an advocate of what we call contraception. And if you look at that word, it kind of tells you exactly what it is, right? Contra, against the inception, or conception. So contraception. And what she will do is she'll move for contraception, promoting it, of course. And when she finally put together the way she wanted to present this, she called it birth control. So she is the world's first significant advocate of birth control. She decided, you know, she simply had to get the word out there. There are things you can do as a woman to keep from getting pregnant. She just wanted people to know that. It doesn't have to, you don't have to get pregnant, okay? And I'm kind of intrigued. If you read the literature that Margaret Sanger kind of puts out, there were more methodologies than you would think of, you know, and some of them are just the basic kind of things. So a rhythm method kind of notion, or coitus interruptus, early withdrawal. But there were like a sponge thing, and you were having the first galvanized rubbers, or condom, I should have said condom, right? You know, those kind of, there are things that they could do. So I didn't know how many things they had at that time, but there were many more than I thought they had at that time, all right? And she simply wanted women to know about this. Now, she would do this just on her own. So she's a nurse and she's communicating with women. They're coming to her with her crying their eyes out. She's going to say, listen, there are things you can do. Let's try to figure out if you can do something about that. But that would mean like communicating with 25 women a day. And she wanted to do much bigger than that. That's not good enough, right? So her next step was to try to create, she called them seminars in family planning. That was the way they were entitled, family planning. And she wanted the women to come in and she tried to get larger audience so she could communicate to more people. And I have to just tell you about this scene. There's a movie about Margaret Sanger, and it was a made-for-TV movie, and it was starring Dana Delaney. So whenever I talk about Margaret Sanger, I've got Dana Delaney in my head, just a crack up, who am I seeing Dana Delaney right now? But they have this scene, and I have to tell you, it is pretty much comical. It's just kind of funny. So it's going to be one of these speeches. She got an auditorium, she got the sign up front says family planning. The women are coming in, but they're kind of like skeptical on what is this? Not exactly sure what's going on. And so they're coming in, they're sitting down, and then here comes Margaret Sanger, and she's up on the dais, and she starts to talk, and she is openly discussing sexuality and openly discussing methodologies. And this is the Victorian era, and people simply did not talk about sex in an open way. And here's how it becomes a funny scene. The women are freaking out. They're going, oh my God, she's talking about sex. She's talking about this. And they're freaking, like, they're getting really nervous. And then some of them bolt. I love that. They bolt out. I can't take it. I'm out of here. Anyway. Kind of a funny scene, but of course a very serious issue. And she just found it was really difficult to publicly communicate about something like contraception. So she turned to the written word. This is a way to get the word out in a wider way. And she just started to create pamphlets. She thought, okay, I'm going to make pamphlets and we can distribute them widely and get them all out there. One of her very first and early famous pamphlets, and I love the title because it's perfect, was entitled What Every Girl Should Know. And y'all know that is absolutely true, right? What every girl should know. And so she begins to put out these publications. Now, as she did them, she had to be explanatory, of course, graphically explanatory. And y'all know that some things don't really work perfectly when you simply explain them. So maybe a graphic suggestion of what it is you're talking about. And I want you to know there is no pictures of penises or anything like that in here, okay? So it's all diagram-based, essentially. And so the penis comes off looking like, like this thing sticking out here, and this is the testicles or something, it's really just super mundane kind of stuff. It reminds me of being in the 6th grade and the nurse giving us our sex education. I don't know if you guys had this, but the girls would all go into their discussion, and the guys would all go into ours. And we had this ancient nurse. She must have been like 90, I'm not kidding, she's probably like 65, but she seemed really ancient to us. And so she's going through all of this, and we're all kind of like uncomfortable one way or the other, and plus like, what the hell is this old lady talking about kind of thing. But I hate how there's always got to be that one person in the crowd. I mean, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. It was all kind of embarrassing to me. And good old George Silva always knew how to bring the house down. He'd be like, are there any questions, children? He raised it. What does 69 mean? I swear to God, he said that. I'll never forget. And I'm like, oh, God, George. I actually don't think that I knew what the hell 69 meant at that time. That's part of it. But I believe that she was absolutely authentic. She goes, I have no idea. Thank God, because if she had an idea, I would have been like really disgusted with the whole thing. I'm sorry. God, we're on tape 2. We'll just edit that part out. Okay, we don't want to have to worry about all this. Anyway, so these diagrams that are kind of in a very simple way showing like how you put a condom on or something like that. Okay, so she begins to distribute these out, and right away the male authority structure begins to come down on her like a hammer. I mean, they just did not like this. Just to show you how aggressive they move against her, even Teddy Roosevelt is aware of this, so this is the President of the United States, and he called her an agent of race death. She's trying to kill the race, right? Women are supposed to be pregnant at every single opportunity. What the hell are you doing? That kind of thing, all right? But they accused her of using the males for pornography. That's a felony offense, but with a potential prison sentence associated. They accused her of obscenity violations. And by the way, some of these laws were created at the moment just to go after her. They're just going to kind of generate the law to guarantee that they can get her. Anyway, she found herself in grave danger. I mean, she's going to be thrown in prison if she's not careful. Under advice of counsel, family, and friends, they said, Jane, I keep going to Jane, Margaret, you better get the hell out of here. So she leaves the United States of America in 1914. It's the beginning of her kind of career moment, and she simply leaves, to avoid the potential, of course, of conviction. She goes to England and to Europe generally, and it's kind of an interesting time to go to that location, right? Because this is the beginning of World War I. She's there, and she is an interesting woman. She had affairs while she was there. It's the foundation of the breakup of her relationship with her own husband. One of her kids dies while she's there, and of course you can imagine the powerful guilt that would be that you're not there with your kid when they need them. It's kind of like a cautionary tale of, you want to be the big political mover and shaker, crusader, but what happens to you the rest of your life? And of course for her, things began to disintegrate one way or the other. She finally did return to the United States in 1916. And things were beginning to change a little bit, probably because of just lack of focus on that issue. She opened up the very first birth control clinic in Brooklyn and was promptly arrested. Things aren't changing that much, but here's what I really want you to know. I don't want you to have to worry about all the nitty-gritty of that. By the 20s generally, attitudes are changing in a dramatic way. And women begin to see her as a heroic individual. She's really doing something very important. The 20s are often seen as kind of a moment of sexual liberation for women. I believe that the two primary proponents of that were Sigmund Freud, simply telling women it's healthier for you emotionally to have an open sexuality, and Margaret Sanger says, you go girl, I can tell you how not to get pregnant, okay? I mean, the two of them are kind of part of the process. By the time we get to the 1960s, she's an American icon. Right? She is someone, of course, who's promoting the well-being of women, not just on a national level, but an international level as well. The last thing that Margaret Sanger did, I have to let you know, is she's the primary mover behind the emergence of a contraceptive pill. She decided that we've got to do something like that to make it very easy for women, of course, and not having to respond to the moment. You all know that that's the problem, right? In the moment, it's hard to do what you need to do at that time, so instead let's have something that's a daily kind of thing. She's not a doctor, right? She was simply a fundraiser and a promoter, and you all know that that will come out in her lifetime, of course, revolution as far as women are concerned. She died in 1966, so I was 9 years old at that time, all right? So her life would cross mine. I have no idea what I would have done if I would have met her. All right. I was kind of a shy person and not really inquisitive at all. Anyway. And not understanding anything about any of this historical crap at all. So, hi, Mrs. Sanger. Bye, Mrs. Sanger. Anyway, but in the end, of course, I think critical impact for women in America, but also for women in the world. If you look at the ultimate kind of notion of what's going on, she's wanting women to take control of their bodies, and exactly what's going to happen, of course, and that becomes one of the most fundamental aspects of change for women in the 20th century. Not everything about her is really kind of kosher, so there's the one thing I have to tell you, which I almost don't even want to, but I'm going to. She got involved in the eugenics movement. It's a social Darwinist notion of the purity of the race, and this isn't really benign, but in its most benign manifestation, that was like, sterilization of emotionally disturbed people, sterilization of physically disabled or people with chronic illnesses, in hopes that that would not be continued within the race, okay? And I don't know if you guys know what this could lead to. This is going to lead to, at least in certain parts, Adolf Hitler, for crying. Anyone who's connected to Adolf Hitler in any kind of way, that's a negative. There was a kind of the sense of this was a benign movement. Of course, we're trying to improve the race, but it's really not, right? It's really a problematic kind of behavior. Even though I think we're heading back that way with genetic engineering, they're going to start to do those kind of things. Maybe is it benign? Is it not? I don't even know. The way this developed at this time, it's not benign. It's problematic to say the least. But so not everything about life is absolutely kosher, but still kind of heroic outcomes as far as women are concerned. So people like Jane Addams, Margaret Sanger, these are primary movers and shakers in the realm essentially of social welfare, and there are others, of course, but I can't tell you everything. I do want to mention one other thing in association with social welfare, and that is that during this time there was the rise of something called the social gospel. And the social gospel was simply an evangelical Christian manifestation of concern that began to appear. And all I really want to do is tell you one quick thing. Motivated by this, there came this group of people who you might call soldiers for Christ, who will venture down into the inner city of America, often dressed in uniform with music background to them. They will often stand outside of stores and places like that, ringing their little bells to attract fundraising, to allow them to do the missions they want to do. But beginning in the Progressive era, you see the rise of something called, is that enough hints for you guys?
Salvation Army.
The Salvation Army. Salvation Army was born in America in the Progressive era, and others of the similar ilk will begin to do certain things. So I just want you to understand there's a lot of people who are concerned in a lot of ways that they will express their concern. Now, among the various forms of individual activity in the Progressive era, to me one of the most exciting was in the area of journalism. Journalism really begins to kind of grow by leaps and bounds in the Gilded Age period. And by the time we get to 1900, you have a really powerful expression that began to appear. First thing I need to do is tell you something about the newspaper industry at that time. You can almost argue that the peak of the American newspaper was around 1900. This is like this moment when newspapers are at the very height of their potential and influence. I had no idea when I started teaching this class that I would be telling you, or even thinking about the end of the newspaper in America. The mass daily is kind of going away. You guys have a sense of that? You know, I started reading the newspaper in 1968 as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old. I think I just read the sports page, to be honest with you. And then, of course, I wanted to expand my notions all the way to the comic page. You know, not like I was like super interested in the world or anything like that, but by the time I was 15, I was reading the whole damn thing, and I pretty much read the whole damn thing every day from that point to this. On Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I get 2 newspapers, and I go through both of them, okay? I get the LA Times, the Riverside Press Enterprise. So I'm like, this is part of my life, and it's something that I can't really get away from, because it's just, you know, habitual as far as I'm concerned. I have noticed, of course, the newspapers getting smaller and smaller and fewer. I mean, you just begin to see, and I'll just ask the question just to see for fun. How many of you read a newspaper on a daily basis? You're exactly the same as every single class I've had, you know. And it's so amazing that, like, you know, 4 years ago I'd get like 2 people raising their hand, and now just nobody raises their hand anymore. So I have a feeling that when I die, the newspaper is done. I'm going to be the last newspaper reader or something like that. Right? Anyway, I'm sure it'll be done. There's other sources for your news, and I get how that all works. Okay, but in 1900, no one could have anticipated that. In fact, I couldn't anticipate that in 1980 for crying out loud. You know. Anyway, but the newspaper industry was sort of reaching its apogee, just this moment, of course, when it was really large scale, a major activity, and extraordinarily innovative and creative at that time. In 1900, the number of mass dailies in the United States of America, I'm pretty sure it's like a peak number, was about 2,500 mass daily newspapers, 2,500. I'm imagining that today there's a few dozen, okay? I mean, there are very few mass daily newspapers anymore. And if you guys know how this works, there are very few companies. I mean, the mass daily newspapers that are there are owned by individual companies that own many of them. So the Union Tribune is associated with the company that owns the LA Times and the Chicago Tribune. Now, they're all linked together, you know, because they have to do that to kind of continue to survive, have multiple markets where they're trying to function one together. At this time, you would have found 10 newspapers in New York City alone. I mean, even small cities would have more than one. It's just like everyone's got a newspaper out there. And because it was this kind of era of relatively cheap newspapers, they call it the era of the penny press. Not exactly. Some of the large ones would have been, but less than a nickel. You know, you're going to buy a paper for less than a nickel, probably routinely, essentially. But it made it a very competitive, a hyper-competitive industry. All these guys trying to make it in the newspaper industry, of course, hyper-competitive with each other. And the hyper-competitive component led to incredible innovation and creativity. Everything about the newspaper that will ultimately develop, and you guys have no idea what I'm talking about because you never look at newspaper, everything about it, you know, is invented in the Gilded Age, in this realm of competition. Headlines, the use of photographs in newspapers, all that's coming out there, of course. The different sections of the newspaper, local, state, national, world news, home and garden, entertainment, sports section. By the way, the sports section, incredible symbiotic relationship, of course, with the rise of sports in America. The more the paper emphasizes sports, the more the sports became important. You know, you look at the media and sports are so tied together that it's, you know, they're inextricable, essentially. And television, of course, rises with the NFL. The two of them are bound together so closely that you can't believe it. Okay? It just shows you this positive. And here it begins, of course, with the newspapers in the very beginning. Comics, it was the first entertainment comics. Political cartoons are extremely old. They've been doing that since at least the 1600s. Swear to God. I mean, that's an ancient kind of activity. The entertainment comic, though, is relatively new. That began in the Gilded Age. And you guys all know, like, I'm talking about Snoopy and stuff like that, right? Maybe you've never heard of Snoopy. If you haven't, I might as well just kill myself right now. Anyway, but one of the earliest characters of comics in those days was called the Yellow Boy. So this would have been like the first really kind of favorite little comic character. And he was a newsie. And you know how each character has to have some kind of, has to have a visual characteristic that you identify instantaneously. So if you draw the Snoopy just silhouette, we all know that's Snoopy, right? Without, those of us that know, we know it's Snoopy, right? So the Yellow Boy had monster big jug handle ears, huge ears, big one. You could pick this kid up and move him around just by his ears, okay? And of course, he was often wears his newsy sign, and he's getting into scrapes when he's a comical character. So that began at that particular time. But you know, all of these things that are fundamental parts of the newspaper, they're all born in the Gilded Age. The only things that are even new for the 20th century are color and graphics. Those are the only two things that come in later. I swear to God, everything else in a newspaper is pretty much from the good old days, essentially. Anyway, so newspapers really began to build at this time. It's because, of course, of the rise of cities. You have the density of the marketplace. You're a newsie. You can stand on a corner and 1,000 people walk by you, right? You don't even have to move a foot. And you can even if you can only sell 10% of the people who walk by, you're selling still, 100 newspapers. You're doing pretty well. And if you're delivering, you're going house to house to house. They're all right next to each other, okay? Gilded Age is also the time of the Industrial Revolution, so of course the printing presses are cranking up to be able to do what they can do. I pity old Ben Franklin having to hand assemble, hand composite, hand print hand press every single page that he would do in a newspaper. It took him days, to just do a single edition. Now they're just rolling through the printing presses, and coming out in massive numbers of papers on a daily basis. So it's all about the Gilded Age, allowing for there to be all these mass daily newspapers. Well, they were hyper-competitive, and the thing that they did, of course, was focus on selling newspapers. And the number one thing that sells a newspaper? What sells a newspaper?
The news.
Pardon me?
The news.
It is the news itself. I'm going to say the story, okay, because it's the story. If you don't buy a newspaper, but you're walking by just a newsstand, and you see it, there's a headline that says something there that really, I got to read that story, okay? The story attracts. And they call this era, it's an era of scandal journalism, They call it yellow journalism, but it's scandal-based because they wanted to have something horrible that would attract your attention. And of course, it's the same as it is today, If it bled, it led, or if it bleeds, it leads, So what they always wanted was to have a daily edition, and the headline would be murder. That's always good, okay? The only thing better than murder was double murder. And the only thing better than double murder suicide. I got to read that. That's going to be a really great story, okay? Anyway, you have this kind of just scandal-driven industry trying to find all these terrible things that are happening, basically, so they can sell more newspapers and be very competitive. Well, here's what happens in the progressive era. You get a coincidence of kind of a social improvement kind of dynamic coming out of the universities. These were university-educated journalists who come out. The first great school of journalism was the University of Missouri. I don't know if you guys have heard that before, but they, for whatever reason, focused on journalism, and so they're really going to create one of the more outstanding journalism schools in the entire world. I was at the University of Missouri for the very first time last summer, and walking by that, of course they have a beautiful, brand new building. It's a really cool-looking thing, and I was just thinking, that's a big place. It's an important place. Anyway, got these socially inspired graduates coming out of the schools of journalism, and they're coming to work for these newspapers, of course, who want to sell stories based on scandals. And so they made this kind of interesting agreement, They knew that there were scandals about America, but these were like the scandals of the Gilded Age, the political scandals and the business scandals and stuff like that. And they were able to convince the publishers that these stories would sell as well as the murder stories, They're really going to promote readership too. So they began to come together, and you get this kind of incredible moment of journalism, journalist expression. It is the first investigative journalism really in the history of the United States, and they're just going to really emerge and begin to look at all the problems of America. But as they finally emerge, they become known as this group of people called the Muckrakers, and this is the potential identification. It was actually Teddy Roosevelt who coined this phrase. It was Teddy Roosevelt, and he didn't like them. He said, "You guys spend all day long just raking through the muck, looking for the slime, looking for the dirt on everything. Raise your head up and look at the sky," or something like that. And the irony was that the investigative journalists, they liked this. They said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I am." So this became like, what they put on their T-shirts and their bumper sticker or something like that. And they liked being called the Muckrakers because they were trying to find out what was wrong with America and present this. This is an identification that, unfortunately, I have way too much information for, so you have to kind of be editing me a little bit. But I want to give you some of it, at least get it started here before we go. So these are simply investigative journalists who are interested in the problems of America, exposing those problems, and really motivating and mobilizing Americans, of course, to do something really good about it. Right? So here we go. One of their big targets was big business. As you guys know, of course, I've already suggested to you that there are some problems with big business. We have the rise of monopoly trusts, and, manipulation in various forms, and there were those muckrakers who simply began to focus in this particular area. And one of the very famous individuals who focused on the problem of big business was a woman by the name of Iva Target. Has anyone noticed a little bit of a trend here in the progressive era? There's some women who are doing some really interesting. It's the beginning of the women's century. Of course, they're facing all kinds of odds still. They're not yet able to vote. That will happen relatively soon. But there are still more women getting educated, of course, and they're doing things that become increasingly important. Anyway, Ida Tarbell becomes one of the sort of stars of this particular story. I have to give you a little bit of backstory here. Her father was a cooper, and coopers are people who make barrels. And so he made barrels for the oil industry. This is in western Pennsylvania. And then he decided to make his own little company to transport oil. So he made his own big barrels, and he put them on wagons, and he was trying to make money transporting oil, until one day this guy comes into town and pretty much wiped him out and everybody else out too. And so that guy's name was John D. Rockefeller. So her father was ruined by John D. Rockefeller. Well, she goes to the university, she gets a degree in journalism, she goes to work for a paper, and she asked the editor if she could do a story on Standard Oil and the Rockefellers. And the editor said, yeah, you go ahead. And I'm sure the editors thought that she was going to write in praise of Standard Oil or something like that, right? But of course, she knew a lot of things that she wanted to tell. So she gets the story as a job. She goes to Standard Oil and she says, I'm going to write a story on you guys. And they welcome her. They said, oh, come on in, And she got to interview John D. And she got to go interview anyone else in the company she wanted to. She could go into the archive. I mean, they gave her open access to everything in the company. And so she's in there and she's going, oh my God, it gets to see all this stuff. Well, she goes in and she comes out and she writes a series of articles. In fact, they're a serial. We call that a series that are all connected. Ultimately, they're going to become a book called The History of Standard Oil. And her intent, of course, was not to praise John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, but to vilify them, And I have to tell you, after that first, and I'm sure the editors were looking at this, oh my God, what's going on? But then they said, well, readers want to read this? Hell yes, they're going to want to read that, right? So they don't care. They're going to sell they want to sell the papers. Anyway, as soon as the first installment came out, the Standard Oil turned on her, like it's going on in style. They closed all access to her. They put a private detective on her at all times to see they did not like people doing that kind of crap, all right? And so she did what any good investigative reporter will do. You find those who will talk, and those are disgruntled family relatives who aren't happy that Uncle Johnny didn't give them enough or something like that for Christmas. Disgruntled former employees who know what's going on inside but aren't happy. There's always going to be some good sources there. And she goes on to write a series of articles. And I have to tell you, when this is done, when she's done, Standard Oil will never be seen in the same kind of way that it was before. They pretty much became like a robber baron, right? They're manipulating the situation, abusing the competition, undercutting the competition, using secret agreements, unethical behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. When the Rockefeller family would go out after the articles were published, they would have people throw crap at their carriage. I swear, like Rotten Tomatoes are bombarding them, and they had to do damage control. They had to really try to reinvent themselves and show what nice people they were. It's a kind of a crack if they would do this, but they had to. And among other things, they're going to start really serious philanthropic activities. They're going to start to really try to promote, different charities and things like that as a result. But anyway, Tarbell took on Standard Oil, and Standard Oil would never be seen in the same kind of way. I am now done with my day, so I have to let you guys go. As much as you want to hear more, I know that you're willing to stay forever. I'm just kidding. Hope you have a nice day. Look forward to seeing you next time.